Sometimes opportunities arise which push you outside your comfort zone. For Kelsey Rex, an out-of-the-blue invitation turned a next-year trip to Alaska into, "We're leaving in 2 months." That accelerated timeline required a matrix-like download of expedition planning and put Kelsey in her sweet spot as a lover of meticulous spreadsheets. It also meant confronting her tendency towards, as she puts it, conservative progression plans. Not only was the trip unexpected, she would be going with someone she'd only climbed with once before. This would be an extended second blind date, as she describes it. So how did it go? You'll have to listen to find out. In this episode, we talk about planning for your first Alaska expedition, how good partnerships are both complementary and foster growth, and what makes the Northeast special when it comes to training for bigger ranges. Before we get to that, shout out to Garrett, thank you, appreciate it, our newest supporter on Patreon. And something else that's new, today's episode is sponsored by Blue Ice. Yeah! Personally, most of my ice screw rack is comprised of Aero lights, so I'm excited for them to be a part of what we're doing. With that as the prelude, here's a quick message from their man upstairs in North America.
Hi, this is Bill Belcourt at Blue Ice. In climbing, weight is the enemy of success. Here at Blue Ice, we make some of the lightest climbing equipment in the world to give you a fighting chance at succeeding in your objectives. The rest is up to you. Good luck out there and enjoy the podcast.
All right, you heard him. Enjoy the episode. Before we get to sort of the bulk of today's conversation, what is it about Alaska that draws you as an ice climber?
Being a climber that's pretty much mostly climbed in the Northeast and North Conway area, honestly, it looks sick. Like if you just look at pictures of Alaska. And I've been inspired by local friends who have done a lot of climbing in Alaska. I had a job last summer or the summer before, just part-time doing carpentry with this couple of guys, Nick Aiello and Justin Guarino, who were 2 out of 3 guys who did first ascent on the north face of Mount Neocola, the Medusa face. And so just hanging out with them was really inspiring, and they just had a ton of stories that they were telling all the time about Alaska, and that kind of put the bug in my ear that it was some place where the skills that I would learn here in New England would transfer to pretty well. So I've always been intrigued by places that I don't know much about, and Alaska was kind of that for me. I have seen pictures, but it's like really far away from New England, so it feels like an adventure. I've never been that far northwest before. Pretty much California was like the farthest northwest I've been in the U.S. So
your trajectory as an ice climber seems a bit like an adventure, and so I'm just curious, could you share just a little bit about your background and how you got into ice climbing to start?
Yeah, so this is going to be my 5th season ice climbing. And the whole progression has been really fast. And I just loved it as soon as I tried it. When I first started ice climbing, it was because I was working in a gear shop, International Mountain Equipment here in North Conway. And I had access to the rental gear in the shop. And they were like, you should probably learn how to ice climb if you're going to be selling ice climbing gear. So I was working for the gear shop, and I had a bunch of built-in partners. So I was able to use the rental gear and get out a ton. So I was kind of that first year going off of the Will Gadd mentality of you should follow 150 pitches before you start leading. I was really cautious. I had heard stories of people falling. I had seen videos of people falling on ice, and I knew that it was like not a super awesome thing to do. So I was pretty conservative straight off and was focused on getting the mileage. So that was my first year. And then my second year, I had some awesome rope gun partners. Specifically, my friend Kiff was who I climbed with a ton. And he just took me up some wild climbs that were probably above my pay grade at the time. But I think when you're put in those situations to where you know it's hard for you and you're struggling, those are growth experiences, and they help you to advance your climbing. So I got out a ton that second season too. And by the probably middle of that second season, I felt like I had probably 100 days on ice from those first 2 seasons. I started leading, and with super easy stuff, but I had a schedule that optimized my time for ice climbing, which was really nice. I was working at the gear shop like 2 days a week, but I also had a serving job that pretty much every day started at 3:30. So I was able to climb all day and then go into work at 3:30, which is like almost when it gets dark here in New England anyways. So that was pretty cool. And then my second season, I had kind of a pivotal moment when I was with my friends Kiff and Brady, and we wrapped into a climb called the Unicorn, and they just handed me the rack and I led it, and it was my hardest climb so far, but that put the thought in my mind that like, wow, I can lead harder ice. So I kind of started on this progression of like leading harder and harder things, and eventually I took a fall ice climbing. Thankfully I had placed like a bunch of screws right before it, and the screws caught me and I didn't fall that far. But from that fall, I like kind of took a step back from focusing on progression and shifted my focus for my third season to be on just making Water Ice 4 feel super chill.
So can you talk about the fall? Because, some people will say, like, I'll never fall in an ice screw. I don't trust it. Some people have taken multiple falls. And so, yeah, I mean, like, what happened and what was the experience like? And did the screws hold?
They held, yeah. It was on a route called the Hobbit Couloir at Frankenstein. It was a day that it was like crowded. There were a lot of people out there. I had been thinking about this route for a long time just because it's one of the classics, and started up it. Things were going great. And then the top out was like, there was no ice at the top. So my tools were just on rock, shaking around, and I didn't feel like I could reach far enough to get a stick in the snow. So, and I was pumped out. So I was at the top out, and I had like sewed it up right beneath me. I had placed like 3 screws right in the same area right beneath me. And yeah, when I was pumped out, couldn't find any sticks. And it was like slab that my tools were on. I eventually just peeled off. And yeah, the 3 screws that I had right beneath me held. But I took a little bit of a swing. And yeah, it shook me up. I was not super proud to have done that, but it showed me where I was. And I was able to frame it as like, something that I could use as a marker and be like, okay, that's too much for me. I need to dial it back. Like, I need to focus on, and which is a very real thing in ice climbing, you can't get too excited about your skills progressing, hop on hard things, because the danger is real.
Did you get back to leading right away, or did you sort of just like cool off for a bit, recollect yourself?
I had some mixed responses from friends. Some people were like, it happens. Like some very experienced people came forward and were like, don't beat yourself up. This kind of thing has happened and slips happen. And so I think I got back to leading pretty much right away, but I just dialed it back a bunch and stuck with like 3s and 4s for a while until I felt like super solid on that. And I think that really helped, having the mileage and getting super comfortable on that kind of terrain.
Knowing what you know now, how would you approach the top out differently?
I would have probably tried to not get so pumped. I probably would have tried to have a little bit more fitness, and obviously I probably wasted some time placing all of those screws. Like, if I had more comfort with that grade, I feel like I would have protected it less and been just more efficient in general on the pitch. So yeah, I would have been less pumped at the top out, been able to reach farther. I also have these awesome tools right now, Forecast Equipment, shout out, that are a little bit longer than traditional tools. They still fit the UIAA, fit in the box that is used to measure tools for ice climbing competitions. But for me, as someone who's 5'3", or 5'2", 5'3" on a good day,
with a negative ape index.
With a negative 3 ape index, they kind of help me to reach a tiny bit farther, use my partner's pick holes sometimes, make less moves in total on a climb. And so I feel like that would have helped me at that point in time, but I just didn't have those tools.
But that experience shaped a lot of how you approached your third season, right?
Yes. Yeah. So my third season, I kept it chill, led water ice for a bunch, 4+. I think I had some intimidation around the water ice 5 grade, just being a big thing in my head and feeling like I shouldn't and couldn't step it up to that level until I had more confidence in general in myself. So I found mentorship. I got out a ton still. And yeah, pretty much like ice climbed probably 4 or 5 days a week. And then my fourth season, I broke into leading water ice 5, which was pretty sweet. I guided a high volume of ice and was doing a little bit more traveling. So the this past season was pretty transformative for me because I felt really confident on stuff that I had worked really hard to feel confident on and was able to like take it to that next level of leading even steeper ice. And it was pretty sweet to feel like I could do that. And I think also getting experience on sighting ice in other places, like traveling to Quebec and climbing their ice there, traveling to Cody and climbing ice there was super helpful because I was just able to read ice in different places.
I know mentorship is sort of this, it's not an amorphous word, but it is kind of thrown out there, the value of mentorship, and then, the counterpoints like the value of figuring things out for yourself. And I guess for you, like, what did that look like for you in your progression?
Mm-hmm. At first, the mentorship was from my friends who worked at the gear shop, who just knew a lot more than me. And then eventually during that third season, I found a female mentor, or a woman mentor, identifying mentor, Micah Burhart, who made it a point to get out with me a number of days per season, which was super helpful because visualization is huge in climbing. And if you have a partner who looks a little bit more like you, acts a little bit more like you can relate to on a deeper level of being a woman, then it's really cool to see them go send a hard pitch and tell you, oh, you need to do things this way, or you should try to do this, and then I think you'll improve. So yeah, that Micah has been an awesome mentor to me here in the Northeast because she also has experience in the guiding field. So she's someone who knows what I'm doing for a living. She knows, and she's climbed a bunch of places. She's now the mother of twins, and she has a book. And she's just a wealth of knowledge in the ice climbing field.
So Mike is a badass, but are there a lot, or are there other or many other female guides, or women identifying guides in New Hampshire?
There are a handful of other female guides or woman identifying guides in New Hampshire, namely Lori Watt, who's doing awesome work. However, she's on the other side of the White Mountains, so she's not specifically in the Mount Washington Valley. And then there's Ann Parmenter, who is a rock star. She is recently retired and has historically guided part-time up here and mostly in the winter. So I feel like I've been this past rock season the only full-time woman identifying guide and I say full-time, but like it's full-time when it's busy season. It's not always full-time. And, I have certain months of the year off. And so it's definitely not like full-time year round, but, during rock season and during ice season, I'm guiding like 5 to 7 days a week, which is great. Shout out to Cathedral Mountain Guides because they give me work. And I think it's just an industry that hasn't totally been tapped into here. And I think that there's a lot of room for growth. And there are a lot of women who are starting to get their single pitch instructor courses and work through the AMGA guide track. And I think that's really inspiring. Recently, the Flash Foxy Festival was here. And it's the second year that the Flash Foxy Festival has been in North Conway. And I just love that event so much because it makes me feel Flash Foxy brings in guides from around the country who identify as women and genderqueer climbing guides. And it just brings the community together and it makes me feel a little bit less alone. I've heard that out west, there's a better ratio of women to men guiding. And here in the Northeast, our ratio is just like skewed or delayed a little bit. And it's hasn't quite caught up to where the ratios are out west. So I think there are some challenges, I sometimes feel like I have to work 2 or 3 times as hard in order to prove myself in the field and be extra professional, be extra tech savvy, be extra strong. Because when a client shows up in the morning and they look at me and I'm like, hey, I'm Kelsey, I'm your guide for the day. And I always have that fear that they're going to look at me and be like, oh, you're our guide? That's interesting. Huh. You're like this little girl. And in reality, I'm going to provide them with this awesome experience and like blow their mind. And so it's just something that I have in my head that's probably on the minds of a lot of other women guides out there. And it's just something that we have to combat with mind games and mileage and time in the field. So those are my thoughts on why there just aren't more women in the guiding field out here in rural New Hampshire. But North Conway likes to say that it's got the highest quantity of guides per capita out of anywhere in the U.S. So I think that's a fun fact. But the guiding industry as a woman has its challenges because we have smaller frames and we're carrying heavy loads. But I think there are a lot of advantages to being a woman in the field because we're just compassionate and caring. And not to say men don't have emotional intelligence, but we are able to like get a read on people sometimes a little easier.
Well, what's interesting to me is I'm from the Boston area, and when I do go out to Crags or to the climbing gym, I went to CRG Cambridge for years and years, and the ratio tends to be 50% women, 50% men, and they're crushers, women crushers. So what is your sense for why people aren't leveling up their skills in pursuit of becoming a guide?
Yeah, I am by no means the strongest climber in this area. There are so many Sendy women in the Northeast, which is so cool and inspires me in a crazy way. But I think that guiding as a job has its challenges because a lot of times most guiding services don't have things like health insurance and a 401k plan. And there are a lot of things that you sacrifice to do a job that that doesn't feel like work. Or for me, that's how it is. It doesn't really feel like work because I'm just taking people out rock climbing or ice climbing. And it's a really fun thing to get to do. I'm incredibly lucky. But I think that sometimes those lady crushers, women crushers have jobs that fit their life, that allow them to do what they love and allow them to still like send hard at the gym, send hard on the weekends, send hard after work. And they don't like feel the need to guide for their job. And for me, climbing was this hugely transformative activity. and it changed my life in an awesome way and allowed me to think differently about my body and my inner strength. And for me, that's why I choose to guide and pursue this profession, is because it was something that I really believe in like a spiritual way, that it can change people's lives and teach them things just beyond the movement. It can teach them skills in resilience and communication and trust, and it can take them to places that they haven't been before. I think that there are also barriers to women coming into the industry, because it's expensive and time consuming to get certified as a guide, which is something that I'm working through at the moment, like going through the AMGA track. And they're starting to have affinity, being a woman showing up to AMGA courses, and you're the only one in that course who looks and acts like you. I mean, I'm incredibly privileged because I'm a white woman, cisgendered, straight. I don't have it nearly as hard as someone who identifies with more minorities than I do, and I recognize that. But even just as a white woman showing up to a course, I am like, for my SPI courses, I think I was the only one on my SPI exam, and there were like 8 guys. And so that makes you think, am I getting special treatment? Are they giving me an easier or a harder time because I'm the only woman? And sometimes that, can get in your head. So, yeah, it's all just about like creating more inclusive spaces for women to enter and progress in the field, which they are doing. There are courses like I was thankful to get a scholarship from the North Face to a women's rock guide course last fall. And that was awesome, to just be in a space where all the other women on my course were in the same place as I was, and we're just equally as grateful to be in this space where it was just us, where we could talk about like, oh, who's having menstrual cramps that day, and who's like, there were just things that we could all identify and bond with each other over being women in the industry. And I think that those spaces are so valuable, and I hope that the AMGA continues to offer more of those. They are starting to offer more higher level programming for women's specific guiding, but there's still courses like I would have loved if there could have been a women's ice instructor course. But I spoke with them about creating one, and they said that would be really cool, but we just don't know if we could fill a course. They said if you find those people and come to us with a group of women who want to take the ice instructor course, then we could probably figure it out. But they didn't think that they could fill a course for the ice instructor course. So
You've had your own journey to becoming a guide, because you were working in resource management and humanitarian work before. So what were you doing before, and what was what sparked the transition into guiding?
yeah, so my college degree is in natural resource management. When I graduated from college, I went into the Peace Corps in Malawi, and I served there for a year and a half. And I was an environmental volunteer, so I was doing environmental education, and I ended up working a lot in the gender equity sector as well, doing like sex ed and reproductive health education. And that was really awesome, but it was also a really heartbreaking experience for me. And I ended up not completing the full term of my Peace Corps experience. Usually you go for 2 years. And I, in full honesty, I was medically evacuated for mental health reasons. So I came back to the States, and Peace Corps was awesome. They treated me really well. They gave me counseling for like pretty intensive counseling for 45 days. And then I worked for the Red Cross for a short time period once I returned. And then I went into the marketing field. But the years that followed, the year or two immediately following my Peace Corps experience was pretty rough for me. I was dealing with mental health problems, a whole host of them, and eating disorder issues, anorexia, bulimia, and those things really impacted my life, my work, my family, my friends. And at the time, I've always been a runner, and I was running a lot, and almost probably as a coping mechanism. And I was not feeling myself well, and I was just like continuing to shrink and spiral into like more self-hatred. And so because that's why people have those kinds of mental health issues, is usually like to gain control over the emotions that they've lost control, that they feel like they don't have any control over. So the doctors told me that I had to stop running, and I ended up going to a rock climbing gym called Salt Pump in southern Maine, and I got a month membership. I started going auto belays by myself, and it just became this really therapeutic thing for me. I was just like throwing myself at the auto belays initially, and I would go there every night after work and just work through stuff in my own mind while I was on the wall. And it made me realize that I really loved it. I really loved the like low impact, flowy kind of movement that it allowed me to do. And it also made me realize that I wanted to treat myself better. And that flipped my world around from this really scary place that it was to a place where I was like, okay, I can't not eat anything during the day and be this sick and also go to the gym and send the auto belay climb that I want to do. I need to feed myself and I need to be healthy. So yeah, climbing made me want to be strong again and get better. So once I started climbing, I pretty much fell in love with it. Through Salt Pump, I found community, and that community, a lot of the community that goes over to climb at Salt Pump is from North Conway. So I made partners and connections who live in North Conway, and eventually that's what led me to move here. Just having those connections and meeting climbing partners who were here, I started coming over to North Conway pretty much every weekend and climbing here. And then I was like, yeah, maybe I can quit my job and move there. So I quit my job and took up a job at the gear store and a serving job, and completely changed my lifestyle from working at a marketing company to one that fit with getting more time in the mountains and climbing more.
We have come full circle back to North Conway. And I'm going to do a time jump, a big time jump, theme jump, topic jump. And so going back to the very beginning of our chat, you had Alaska on your mind for future seasons. You were thinking about it as you were getting into ice climbing. And then things really accelerated this past year because Allie Oaks, that's not her actual name, right? It's Allie.Oaks on Instagram, but I actually don't know her name.
Yeah, that's her real name. Mm-hmm. Allie Pine is her way that she makes it her name Alpine. But Allie Oaks is her full name, or Allison Oaks.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, now I know. So you had connected earlier in that season, and then she reached out to you with an offer to join her in Alaska. So do you mind just talking us through like what happened? What was the proposal, and how are you feeling about all that?
Yeah, so the women's specific rock guide course that I took in El Dorado Canyon not this fall, but the fall before, connected me with this woman, Lael Butler. And Lael and I went on a girls' climbing trip to Cody, Wyoming. And when we were in Cody, Wyoming, we got set up through mutual friends with Allie Oaks and Dane Stedman, who live in Cody, and they're just guides, crushers. Allie's a travel nurse, but has set some roots down in Cody. She bought a house there. and we got to stay there they let us stay there for 5 days while we were on our climbing trip, which was super hospitable of them. And Allie had the day off on the first day of Lael and I's trip there. So me and Lael's trip, grammar. And so she came out climbing with us and showed us around for that first day, which was awesome. We went to do the triptych pillars which was like a pretty big day, because she hadn't been out there. And so we were just like on-siting as a group of 3, and it was so fun. And Lael and I had thought about going to Alaska in spring 2024, this coming spring. And we had been talking about routes like ham and eggs and shaken not stirred. And I think that came up in conversation in the car ride with Allie, and because she had already been to Alaska in spring of 2022 with Dane, but she was trying to go back this spring, probably every spring for the foreseeable future. But she wanted to go on a girls trip. And so she wanted to have a trip where she was like taking off her training wheels from climbing with Dane and like have a strong female partner. So I think she had another partner lined up, and that might have like fell through. And so she reached out to me in early February of last year and asked if I would have any interest in going on a trip with her that same season, which would be like in a couple months from the time point that she asked me to go. And I was like, give me 24 hours. I need to think on it. Need to see if it's financially viable. And I crunched some numbers, thought about it a little bit, and then pretty much immediately, less than 24 hours later, I contacted her and was like, abso-freaking-lutely, I would love to go on a trip with you. That would be sick. And then we started planning.
If I know nothing else about you, it's that you love planning and preparation. So let's dive into that. Because basically things got accelerated by over like a year. And like how are you approaching this now that it was coming at you like fast?
Yeah, so there was a lot of planning to do in those 2 or 2.5 months that we had leading up to the trip. And I felt like a little bit overwhelmed by how much I felt like I needed to learn. This was going to be my first time going on an actual expedition rather than climbing trip, and my first time glacier traveling. And so I just felt like I had a lot to learn. So I did everything I could to research about going on an Alaskan expedition. And it's crazy how much information I didn't find online about going on an Alaskan expedition. A lot of the information that I found was about going on like a guided Denali trip. And that was kind of helpful, but it doesn't give you the full picture of what you need to bring as like a self-sufficient team. And so I crowdsourced info. I tapped into the community here, and in my research, I made a long list of questions, and then would meet up with people for coffee, like Nick Aiello, and just drill him with questions and be like, okay, I have this question. What do you think about like this? And what are these things? The one resource that I did find online was actually written by a couple of North Conway locals, Byard Russell and Michael Weichert, and it's called An Exhaustive Alaska Expedition Packing List. And you could probably link to that or something, but it provided a list and a spreadsheet, which really is my love language. And I was able to combine that with a spreadsheet that I already had in order to make this like mega gear spreadsheet of what Allie and I needed. So we, over the course of those 2 months, had calls pretty much every week to sort out our itinerary, our travel plans, who was bringing what gear, what we needed to acquire separately and as a team, what routes we were going to climb, what mountains we wanted to be on, how we were going to climb them, what did we want to eat en route, and what did we want to eat like at base camp on the glacier. So those were all things that we talked about in our planning phase while updating spreadsheets and crowdsourcing info. My main hesitation with going on the trip was the fact that I just like didn't have $10,000 to spend on gear, and like everything kind of adds up. Like you need multiple tents, and you need a backup pair of tools, and you need like a backup rope, and there are just things that I just didn't have. Like I didn't have 2 Whisper Light stoves and 4 stove pumps, and so I was able to, through telling people that, oh hey, I'm like spontaneously going on this Alaska expedition as a part of a woman identifying team, and thankfully the North Conway community has a ton of badass alpinists here, and I was able to like borrow gear in bits and pieces from, I don't know, a dozen people here in the community, which was incredibly helpful and really alleviated the financial stress of me going on this trip. So gathering all the gear, documenting what gear we still needed and who was bringing what was a part of my preparation. And then I also met up with local people in the guide community and went over crevasse rescue skills and glacier travel skills. I printed off topos of the routes that we were planning on doing onto like waterproof paper, just in case. That didn't end up being super useful because we didn't end up doing any of the routes we planned intended on doing. But yeah, the intention was there.
For the details, how much did this trip cost? And if you hadn't gotten the support that you did from North Conway, how much total do you think it would have cost?
If I had had to buy all the gear myself, I'm guessing it would have been like $10,000. Just because we borrowed multiple tents from the community here. I borrowed like a negative 25-degree sleeping bag from a friend. I borrowed down booties. I borrowed pickets. I borrowed a terrier. I borrowed 2 stoves. Like there are just so many pieces of gear, and that probably adds up pretty quickly. Maybe not $10,000, maybe like 5 or 6 or 7. But it ended up costing me probably about $3,000 with travel. From like my flights from Boston to Anchorage were about $900 because they were last minute. And then there's a shuttle that you have to take from Anchorage to Talkeetna, and that's about $150, I believe. And then our flights from the glacier, or from Talkeetna to the glacier, were about $700, I think. So just for me, my travel costs were probably $1,600, $1,700, and then that's not including food expenses, and then time in Talkeetna, and then any other gear that I needed to buy that was like specifically for me. And we ended up coming off of the glacier a little bit early, so then there was just added costs associated with that.
I didn't realize. I mean, I knew gear was expensive, but I didn't realize it was like that much of a percentage of an expedition.
Yeah, I'm very thankful to now have the support of a couple different brands, which is like very life-changing for me, working in the guiding industry, and not always the most lucrative career path. Brands like Sportiva and Blue Ice, who are helping me with gear here and there, so that's really awesome. And moving forward, I'll have that support, but didn't have that for this past trip. And there were some things that I realized that you need to have. Certain things that I borrowed were just like didn't fit. Like I had down booties that were very generously donated to my cause, and they were like many sizes too big and just like didn't keep my feet warm. And so there are lessons that I learned in borrowing gear that are things that I should just invest in for future Alaska expeditions.
I think people outside of New England oftentimes downplay the terrain, the climbing, the weather, but we've actually had a ton of alpinists and mountaineers from the New England area going out to the big ranges. So what is it about the training and the terrain locally that allows you to prepare for these bigger objectives?
The mountains are small. Our tallest mountain is like 6,000 feet. And that's Mount Washington here in the Northeast. I'm not sure. I think it's the tallest mountain in the Northeast, but yeah, at least in in our local area, Mount Washington is the tallest. And compared to out west, that is not tall, but the weather is marketed as the worst weather in the world. The terrain is pretty rugged. It's like really rocky. It's really wet oftentimes. It gets really cold in the winter, and things are just icy, slippery, not ideal. And I think that variety of conditions, variety of terrain, ruggedness of terrain creates people, or allows people to have more tricks in the bag and get out on less than ideal days. On the rainy days here, people are still going out dry tooling and or climbing wet rock. And I think that helps you grow as an alpinist or as a climber by just, not only going out on the really nice days. Like, I know that out in Colorado, sometimes they have 300 days of sun per year, which is awesome, but that's not going to train you for super harsh conditions. And then our local alpinists who have done a ton of climbing in Alaska are Kevin Mahoney, who climbed the Slovak Direct, and Freddie Wilkinson, who did the Tooth Traverse, and Byard Russell, who's done a lot of development out there. And so there are a bunch of North Conway local hardmen who have chosen this as their place to settle down, and their training grounds for bigger mountain ranges. And I think that's pretty cool that it's just become this mountaineering community on the East Coast that has so much knowledge of bigger ranges.
So you get to Alaska, you're going to Talkeetna, and your original plan seems to change. So where did you end up, and what were the routes you ended up getting on?
Yeah, our original plan was to go to the Ruth Gorge, and climb either Ham and Eggs or Shaken Not Stirred, or we were going to go over to the Peak 11,300 area and try, I believe, the Southwest Ridge. And so that was our A plan and our B plan. And we showed up to Talkeetna Air Taxi, and we learned that there were already a bunch of teams going for Ham and Eggs and Shaken Not Stirred. And so that influenced our decision to not go there, because a lot of these Alaskan ice climbing routes are just huge funnels where you don't want to be underneath someone on a couloir kind of climb. So we knew that we had friends who were going to be on the Tokasitna Glacier, which is at the base of Mount Huntington. And specifically, one of those friends was Allie's boyfriend, Dane, and his climbing partners, Grant and Zach. And so we ended up totally 180ing plans and scrapping our initial plans. And in the 30 minutes before takeoff, we decided that we would go to the Tokasitna Glacier. And so we were weighing our bags, we were packing things away, we were changing into our outdoor clothes. And at the same time, we were scraping the internet for any beta we could find on Mount Huntington on the couple of routes that we thought we could go for. Mount Huntington is, for people who aren't familiar with it, it's just this super steep pyramid of rock and ice. It's about 8 miles southeast of Denali. And while it's not the tallest mountain in the area, its peak is at 12,000 feet. It's notorious for there's no easy way to the summit. The entry level routes on Mount Huntington are pretty much the routes that we were going to go for, and they still clock in at Water Race 4 plus, M4, and at 10,000 feet, that feels pretty stout sometimes. So, we ended up pivoting plans going to the Tokasitna Glacier, and I'm super glad that we ended up going there.
I think Ham and Eggs goes at WI4, M4 as well, right?
I think it's like a lot of snow climbing with like maybe a couple moves of water ice 4 is what I understand. I'm not totally sure.
Okay, because the question is, West Face Couloir and Colton Leach seem like quite a big kind of step up, actually. And so I'm curious how you were feeling in that moment, because you're pushing your maybe experience level and comfort level, and now you're pivoting sort of last minute to something a little bit more objectively challenging.
Totally. And I really appreciate that in Allie, is that like she always wants to go for like the harder thing and step up to a challenge, and doesn't want to do the easier thing. And I sometimes need that little push. So yeah, those routes on Mount Huntington were a little bit more difficult than the routes we were going to try to do. So I was feeling excited and nervous and jittery, but I also had a lot of trust in the fact that she'd been there before, and it was a little bit of extra insurance that we knew people who were on that glacier, because they could like watch us while we were en route, or just knowing that we knew people who were going to be around was pretty nice.
So you did the 2 routes. How did they go?
The first route that was on our mind was the West Face Couloir, which is this super classic 4,000 foot route, water ice 4 plus M4, and it has like this 2,000 foot approach and then 20 more pitches after that. And so we spent a couple of days just making base camp, waiting out some bad weather, and then when we got a nice weather window, we decided to go for it. And it was a learning experience. It was like super gorgeous and really fun, but definitely got a little bit suffery for us. We had only climbed 1 day together, so it was a little bit of like a second blind date. And we were just like still working out the kinks of our partnership. So all that said, I think we like worked pretty well together. We had some things happen that changed the course of the day. Like early in the morning, our boiling pot of like 4 liters of water spilled over, and we had to like reboil that pot of water, which took another hour out of our morning and caused us to delay the start. We got like, I don't know, maybe 800 feet up the approach and realized that we didn't have Allie's set of glacier glasses, so had to turn around and then restarted up the route, and that cost us some time. And then we were second in line out of like 3 parties on the route. There was Matt Cornell, who's a phenomenal athlete, and he was soloing the route, which he did camp to camp in like 10 hours and 50 minutes or something bonkers, which is wild, to just like be in the presence of that and be like, what the heck are you doing? But he was in front of us. No one had been up this route yet, so he was like setting the track, and we were thankful to like just be following his route finding a little bit. And there was a party that was behind us from Montana, and we felt really guilty for having our start delayed, because that meant that we were closer to them than we had wanted to be. We were just like more behind on our time plan. So we were doing everything we could to just hustle to get like as far up the route as we could. So we were sacrificing things like self-care, and that ultimately is like why we turned around at 11,000 feet at the intersection of the West Face Couloir with the Harvard route. And yeah, we were just like feeling pretty depleted, didn't feel like we had enough sunlight left to do the remaining pitches to the summit. So we thought that it was like in our best interest to just turn around. So we began like the long descent, and that was a really good learning experience, just in big mountain self-care, big day self-care, slow as smooth and smooth as fast. And we could have like just taking a chill pill sometimes. Had a break and drank some water, and I could have been better about like belaying and eating. I think that's the thing with like two people, like you're always in go mode because you're either belaying or you're climbing. So, yeah, that route, while we didn't summit, I felt like it was a success because we came back safely. And then we had a couple of days of like repacking our bags and figuring out what we were going to do next. And we chose a route called the Colton Leach, which also begins with another different ice couloir that's almost as steep as West Face Couloir. But in my mind, it was just a little bit more ephemeral. It was so gorgeous to be back in there. And yeah, Colton Leach is more obscure, I think less trafficked, but about equal in difficulty, just because it has some M4 at the top. And so we changed a couple of things about our strategy for this second route. We decided that we were going to bivvy on the route. So we weren't going to try and do it in a push like we were trying to do the West Face Couloir. We packed more stuff, but because we had just had the practice of doing a route, our packs like weren't that much heavier. We just like trimmed the stuff we didn't need from the first route and packed a tent and some sleeping bags, and just altered our strategy a little bit. We started earlier too, and our self-care was way better on the Colton Leach. Our efficiency was way better, and we just like charged up this couloir. It was a lot colder also than the day that we were on the West Face Couloir, but we were psychologically more comfortable on Colton Leach because we had just like, I don't know, I felt like I was just like getting my groove a little bit because it wasn't my like big first route in Alaska. It was like, my second. So I had more confidence. I was leading more stuff, and we got to the top of the Colton Leach like main ice couloir, and we had seen this cornice from binoculars, but we didn't really know how big it would be in real life. And when we were standing under it, we realized that it was like kind of like bus sized, and we thought like when we were looking at it in the binoculars that it might be doable to get around somehow. And in person, Allie valiantly tried to mix climb around the cornice on some really like sugary snow and slabby climbing, and it just like it was taking us a little bit of time to problem solve, like how do we get around this obstacle. And we didn't feel like there was really a way to like tunnel through it super safely. That's definitely a gap in my knowledge coming from the East Coast, is I'm not familiar with climbing through cornices. And I don't think Allie is either from climbing in Cody, Wyoming. So eventually we were taking so much time trying to get around this thing that the weather started warming up, things started crashing down around us, and a huge snow mushroom like that was right next to us just collapsed. And we could see Dane and Zach and Grant down below us on the glacier, and they were just pacing back and forth. And we kind of like were feeling that same way internally once things started to warm up a little bit. Just that it was like we weren't in a great place being right stuck under this cornice as things were starting to warm up. So we decided to bail, went back to camp after, doing the descent. And I don't know, I felt pretty good about that one because it was just like a lot more efficient, and I felt more comfortable on that route. But a little bit of a heartbreak to not make it to the summit on either route. But I feel like the fact that we challenged ourselves and went for, didn't go back to the West Face Couloir when the weather was nice. We went and chose a different route so that it would just provide us with a different experience. I feel like all of those things are just increased my exposure to different terrain and different obstacles, and hopefully will be beneficial moving forward.
So, I mean, it sounds like you learned and experienced a ton on this trip. What are the takeaways? Like, what did you learn from that experience?
Yeah, I learned so much in the planning phase, but then I learned so much in like the trip itself and the debrief with Allie. We made lists when we got back from the trip of what we, and I think that these are going to be really helpful moving forward, of what we wish we brought, what we brought that we didn't use, what food did we eat that we wish we hadn't brought, or that just like froze immediately. I learned that stoves are going to break, and things are going to break just because it's really cold, and stuff starts to malfunction when it's really, really cold. So be prepared for your Whisper Light stoves to sometimes malfunction. And some gear really needs to fit, like down booties. I learned that, said that already. Have an A plan and a B plan, but also have like a C and a D plan as well. And I learned how to stay warm on really cold nights. You have a warm sleeping bag, which if you don't have a warm sleeping bag, you can take a couple of sleeping bags and put them inside of each other. So like if you only have like a 0 degree and 15 degree sleeping bag, you can put the 15 degree inside of the 0 degree, and then you have just like more down surrounding you. I was thankful to have a 25 degree sleeping bag, which I shoved all of my electronics in the bottom of the bag at night so that my body heat would kind of like keep the batteries a little bit warm. Because we would wake up every morning to frost on the inside of our tents just from the cold. So, and warm Nalgene's by taking boiling snow into water, filling the Nalgene's up with boiling water, and then you can like put one of them down by your feet to keep your feet warm, and then one of them like in between your legs, and that helps to keep your core pretty warm during the night.
What did you learn about your partnership with Allie and about yourself? And what did you take away from going in pseudo blind?
I learned that we're both like pretty spunky, bubbly, happy-go-lucky people, and that our strengths complement each other pretty well. Allie is like super spontaneous and just like totally the most kind person you'll ever meet, and like totally leads with her heart and is always hungry for a challenge. I think that sometimes I'm a little bit more like self-deprecating New Englander, and I am not as spontaneous. I really like to plan, and I think that those two, I think I'm a little bit more conservative sometimes, like on the like objectives that I'm gonna set for myself. So I think that she kind of pulls me out of that a little bit, and I think that I am able to like make up for it in like my research and planning aspects, and like guiding mileage also helps me to be a good partner to Allie. And in terms of strength, she's just like incredibly strong. She's a phenomenal athlete, and like, yeah, she's on the list to look out for of people who are just like coming up in the field. So she's the rope gun for sure. And I'm really glad that she reached out to me, because it was like a life-changing experience for me to go to Alaska with her and to learn from her and to see her like excel in that field, and for her to see me like kind of come into my own in the terrain. And like if I hadn't had this trip happen this past year, then I would have not known that I like love Alaska so much, and that it's somewhere that I want to go back to for a bunch of years every spring.
How has this trip changed your perspective on climbing and also guiding, if at all?
This trip made me realize that there is so much value in the volume of guiding that I do, just because it allowed me to be, I feel like I teach people how to pack their bags for a big day. I feel like our transitions were like pretty smooth. And I think that the technical, like the repetition of guiding a lot helped it to mean to not really have to focus so much on like what's this anchor going to look like. It just helped me to not have to focus on certain technical things and be able to just like climb in that environment. And definitely makes me want to get stronger. And that's been something that I've been trying to do over the past year, at least specifically in these past couple months, is like start training for ice season, which I've never like actually trained and lifted weights before. So this is a whole new thing. I've always just gotten to where I am through play and mileage and work. And so to actually be training for something feels really rewarding, and like I'm hopefully building some strength that'll pay off.
So what are you focusing on for your training?
I'm focusing on building power. I think I have okay endurance, at least endurance with my legs and cardiovascularly. So I'm working on trying to get my upper. Currently I'm down and out with a broken kneecap, so I'm focusing on building my upper body power and strength. And I have to compensate now because I have this broken leg. I'm just like gonna camp this up all the ice that I can. So I'm doing weighted hangs, weighted Tabata hangs. I'm doing some like weighted pull-ups. I'm doing walk-off training and just lifting weights, trying to get my wrists really strong and my forearms really strong, and antagonist muscles in my forearms all beefed up for a season of guiding and Alaska. We are hoping to do the Harvard route this year if things go to plan. And so we just want some redemption. We want to tag the summit. Not that that's what it's about. It's about the journey. But I think we realize that we have the capability. And so that's what our sights are set on. And at least my like training sights are set on is training like probably specifically this winter to make it up that in good fashion, and maybe some other routes in the Alaska range as well. I just loved it up there so much. I didn't want to leave the glacier. I felt like I felt really comfortable. So I would like to stay there for a tiny bit longer this year, and maybe climb some other places other than Mount Huntington after Allie and I try the Harvard route.
So we talked about how New England has a lot of opportunities to train for these bigger ranges, and you've proven that out in your own experience. For a route like the Harvard route, what would a day look like? Like, are you planning to emulate something similar length and difficulty in New England? Or, yeah, I guess, like, how does getting out in the terrain look from a training perspective? Do you need to simulate that, or do you already kind of know from last year?
I feel like I know a little bit from last year. It's going to be some like snow climbing, some like the Harvard route will have a little bit like more lower angle ice, and then it'll be a couple of pitches of like harder mixed climbing and back into some like lower angle ice terrain. And I think that we'll probably bivvy on the route. So my training for this season is going to include like some suffery winter camping and just getting super comfortable with my overnight gear and psychologically comfortable with just like sleeping out in the cold, in the elements. And, you know, when you're bivvying on a route, you probably don't have a negative 25-degree sleeping bag. So like just like getting okay with sleeping in the cold and with less. And around here, pretty much the only things that we can do to simulate like big days are big vert link ups, specifically probably the presidential range, that allow you to just go up and down and traverse mountains. And that's what I'll do for training, like endurance, big day, leg muscles, walking with a heavy pack. But I feel like I get a lot of that fitness by leading Mount Washington trips. I guide people up Mount Washington, and those are like, I'm not moving fast most of the time. It's which is good, like time on feet with a heavy pack and long days. So I think that training pays off.
Man, you get paid to train. I need to become a guide.
I know, right? That's why it doesn't feel like work.
You mentioned in giving a presentation about your trip, feeling imposter syndrome.
Totally. Yeah. I feel like this is something that I've struggled with in my own mind, both like just during the trip and in the guiding sphere as well, as a woman, and as someone who I haven't been climbing forever. I've been climbing for rock for like 6 years, and I've been climbing ice for 4 so far, and this is gonna be my 5th season. So, I feel like the imposter syndrome comes from feeling like I don't have as much experience as some other people, but I think that I totally that's just my own brain, and I have mileage to make up for that. Like from living here, have just been able to go out like in the mornings and at nights and squeeze in climbing to every single day, which is pretty cool. And specific to the glacier, I guess, like showing up for me on the Tokushima Glacier at the base of Huntington, which is like this notoriously like hard mountain to climb. All the people on our glacier were just elite athletes, and I felt like I was the girl who showed up with all the borrowed gear, which I was, and like a total noob. And then specific to the presentation that I gave at IME, I had only seen presentations before from people who had done some cool stuff and made it to the summit. I kind of felt like, oh, I feel inferior because we didn't make it to the summit during our attempts. Why should I be giving a slideshow? But I realized that in stepping up, that there's a lot of things that I can like inspire other people to go on their own rad trips, and that I can shift the focus from being like I conquered this mountain, I summited, to we failed and this is all the stuff we learned. And is it really a failure if you like learned so much in the journey? And so that was pretty cool for me to learn. It's just like I felt like I had heard some comments from friends being like, oh, why is she doing a summit if she didn't summit anything? But for me, it was just like this huge experience. And a lot of people in the community, when I came back, had said, you should give a slideshow. And I eventually got sick of them saying, you should give a slideshow. And caved and put a lot of preparation into it. And it was a really good thing for me to do.
What's next for you?
I am coming off this injury. I have the ice instructor course this winter in Uray that I'm super psyched for. And then I'll just be guiding a ton over the course of December, January, February. And then in February, I'm teaching at the Mount Washington Valley Ice Festival and the Michigan Ice Festival. And in April, I'll go back to Alaska with Allie. So I have more guiding on the horizon, more chasing the big mountain goals that I have. And I'm super psyched because as of a couple months ago, I have a couple of brands in the climbing industry that are supporting me and cheering me on in those pursuits as a woman in the industry and a woman trying to go do big mountain stuff. So specifically, those are La Sportiva and Blue Ice, who have been really supportive, and they're helping my stoke and my goals progress. And it just feels like they recognize all the time and effort I've been putting in over the past couple of years.
Last question. If you were to give your younger self a piece of beta, and this can be for life or for climbing, what would that be?
Ooh, very good question. I would say follow your heart. Start saving earlier, Kelsey, than you. And be kind, try hard, and treat people well. Keep the people around you well, and that'll like come back around if you keep paying it forward. I know I'm just speaking in cliches, but like relationships and friendships are everything. And yeah, just follow people who make you feel good.
Well, thank you very much, Kelsey, for chatting today. Really enjoyed the conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate you being mindful to have women on the podcast and more representation. Love to see that. And I think you're doing really cool stuff. I'm excited to listen to more episodes.
And of course, thanks to our supporters on Patreon for helping us make this podcast a reality. If you dig what we're doing, consider joining Patreon as well. Membership comes with perks such as a supporter-only t-shirt, which is super fly, Q's and A's, or really normal people would say Q&A, Q&A's with special guests, a look behind the scenes, and much, much more.